To this session of the Ring of Fire Convention. This one is on the Caineverse. And if you're wondering what the Caineverse is, it will be explained to you. And with no further ado, I am going to, the other people here are all participants in the Caineverse. I will be myself. I'm not sure exactly when, but Chuck and I have a contract to do a novel together in the Caineverse called Triage. But I have not actually worked in it yet, although I've read it. So with no further ado, I am going to ask Chuck or whoever else wants to answer, but I think it'll be Chuck. What is the Caineverse?
Caineverse. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming along. Both my co-panelists and everybody out there who's going to spend the shorter part of an hour with us, I think. Caineverse, very briefly, is short for the book's the protagonist's name is Cain Riordan. I did not call it the Caineverse. I would not have had that nerve. It was originally called the Tales of the Terran Republic, became just the Terran Republic. And then people started calling it the Cain books. And in fact, that anything that came out as where Cain was one of the characters came out as a Cain Riordan novel from Baen. Lo and behold, I think it was Casey and David Weber who simultaneously began referring to it as the Caineverse. And my attitude is that if those two people are going to name it after the main character and everybody jumped in on the bandwagon, you know, on the one hand, branding is a great thing. So yeah, sure. And if it works well enough for Honor Harrington, it can work well enough for Cain. So I figured I wasn't going to resist that flow. It's hard SF. It's interstellar. It's an interstellar epic with intrigue, a lot of military components to it, a lot of first contact in it. And the sense of wonder aspect of it, which I absolutely insist on having there, is done with the kind of rigor you probably would expect more with a techno thriller. So that's the really short version of it. Five novels that follow Cain Riordan and his unfolding story. An anthology which originally came out with Eric Flint's Ring of Fire Press is soon going to come out in a new edition with Chris Kennedy's CKP, and Beyond Terra Press. Which is sort of dedicated to things from the Caineverse. And I think this is plenty of time now to have the other folks on the panel jump in and introduce themselves. Chris, go for it.
All right. Having been mentioned, I'm Chris Kennedy, former naval aviator, elementary school principal, now science fiction, fantasy, author, editor, publisher. Head CKP, which is Chris Kennedy Publishing, which will publish about 60 books this year. And we are really, really excited to have the Caineverse under the Beyond Terra Press imprint. Over to you, Ike.
Hey everybody, I'm Kevin Eichenberry. I'm a retired Army officer and been writing military science fiction for about 10 years now. I have 12 novels in print, several with Chris Kennedy Publishing, the Protocol War, as well as a different series. And I actually have a novel that's coming along with Eric that we may see the light of day soon. It's a follow-on to Time Spike through Baen Books, so that should be a fun time.
Nice.
Cool. I'm Griffin Barber. I'm also been co-authoring with Eric Flint. We did 1636 Mission to the Mughals. Chuck was the one who encouraged me to write for Graniteville Gazette, the magazine that both supports and draws its audience from the 1632 universe that both Chuck and I have now written in. 1636 Mission to the Mughals, and then coming next May is 1637, The Peacock Throne, which is the follow-on to that. But in the Caineverse, I've written the Man-Eater, which is the third book in the series. And it was really fun to write. Chuck and I go a bit back in the science fiction writer, fantasy, fun kind of category. I first read Chuck as a teenager in the War World series with Cornell. And he has a philosophy that I'm sure he'll want to talk about a little bit that has certainly helped me out in my career. Oh, and I also have a book coming out September 7th, which will, I guess, be out for about a month by the time this airs, called Second Chance Angel with Casey Azell, who's also an author in the Beyond Terra Press imprint, and Chris Kennedy Publishing a wider. She's got several series with him, or several books with him.
Griff, when's the book coming out?
The 8th of September.
Okay, so it'll have been out a month.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Can't wait. I'm excited for that book. After you guys did that reading a while back, very excited.
Cool.
It's a very good book. Griff asked me to read it and blurb it, which I did. And I sent him this, which I intended to be a joke, but they took it seriously. But I forgot exactly what I said, but he obviously got a little hurt. So I sent him back an email saying, Griff, A, it was a joke. B, I finished the book, and trust me, I do not finish books unless I'm enjoying them. I really don't. If I'm reading a book and I'm not enjoying it, I've never seen any reason to throw good time after bad money. So it just goes in the garbage can. And I finished that and wrote a blurb, and a very good blurb. And
Yes, you did.
I do not lie in blurbs. I don't. If I really read a book and really don't much care for it, I very politely tell the author, oh, geez, I'm really tied up, and, gosh, sorry, I just can't do it. But their book is really good. And if you haven't bought it already, well, buy it. And we are doing autographing sessions all through the convention. So Griff will be on one of those sessions, and Alexi is running that. So the book will be available.
Cool.
Okay, Chuck, I want you sort of did it, but I think we need something more comprehensive, which is what exactly is in the Caineverse as of now?
As in titles?
Yes.
Okay. So right now, the first book is Fire with Fire. That came out in 2013. That won the Compton Crook Award, was Nebula finalist. The one after
free?
that, and you might say that is, pardon me?
Currently free?
Currently free on both Amazon and Bain.com. So the first hit is free. So like other recreational substances, it's easy to get in, hard to get out. At least that's the model. And so the first one you could say is a lot of intrigue. It's introduction to the universe. The second one, that first contact that happens at the end of Fire with Fire, with a title like Trial by Fire, it's probably not a surprise that it's an invasion tale. After that, we have three books that are essentially, I call them the Emissary Arc, because at the start of this, Earth thinks it's alone. It's set in 2118, 2120 roughly. And when our protagonist is sort of cold slept by being the wrong guy in the right place at the wrong time, and wakes up, that has changed, and that has changed significantly. Both there's travel to other star systems, but still we believe we're alone. However, he's the one who's sort of sent when there's a suggestion that it may have, that may be changing, or that may not have always been the case. And his credentials for this is simply that he's not an idiot, and everybody's presumed he's been dead for 7 years, so he's off the grid. So, and once again, being the right guy in the wrong place at the right time, this continues on. So in the third book and the fourth book and the fifth book, he is in essentially first contact situations with the fairly small number of other intelligent species that are known at this time. The third one is called Raising Cain. The fourth one is called Cain's Mutiny, and the fourth one is Mark of Cain, spelled M-A-R-Q-U-E. So he's obviously probably wandering a bit off the beaten trail of I guess you could say, governmental and official rectitude. So that's what's out there right now. Lost Signals is a compilation of It's an anthology. It's a good chunk of anthology for your money. It's about 155,000 words, and it has a sort of unusual structure in that the first part of it looks like wire copy, and it is, in fact, faux wire copy from that universe, and it tracks. The wire copy tracks from about 2115 to about 2125, and each one of these is the official story, and then each one of the stories in it is what really happened. So that's the structure. And I can also tell you that right now we are in the final stages, after a lot of back and forth, of getting signing a contract with Audible about that. So
And
that's what's in the universe right now.
that's where
No, it's not.
Well, you're right. It's not. But I was leaving that for you because we don't want to hear from one talking head forever. There is this
Sure we
other
do.
thing.
so we will
There
move
is
to we will move to the next very visible talking head, who like myself does not hide his presence under a whole bunch of hair. So go ahead, Griff. You're next.
You're muted.
You're muted.
I think Chris actually would
There
be.
we go.
I think Chris would be the best one to talk about this next phase because he kind of wrangled everybody together and combined us with Chuck's vision.
All right, Chris.
Okay, there are 6 books in the Murphy's Lawless series. I think Chuck just passed it to me because he wanted to see if I could name them all off. And he probably didn't want to, but I'm sure I can. The first book is Shakes by Mike Massa. It also has an intro into the world of Murphy's Lawless specifically from Chuck himself, which gets you situated into the universe and where everything is going on for this series of books. It's 6 books, like I said, which will eventually be braided into one with another 10 or 20,000 words from Chuck. So you're really going to get your money because each is about a 30,000 word novella. So by the time it's done, it's going to be pretty much, let's see, 6 times 30, 180. It's going to be about 200,000. So it'll be a hefty one. So Mike Massa starts it off, gets the introduction into the world. The next book is Kevin Eichenberry, to my right, or as I look at it anyway. I don't know where he is on your screen, with his book Obligations, which is a former armor officer, something that he knows just a little bit about. And I will say that all of the people in this series wrote characters that they know pretty doggone well. So you're getting the real thing. Oh, thanks there, Griff. Yeah,
my wife is reading Shakes right now, so I don't have that copy.
Yeah. Then you've got Griffin Barber's Man-Eater, which you see there in the middle. Promises by Casey Azell. Pearl by Mark Wandry, and then my very own Wave Off, which will conclude the season 1. Some people like season 1, some people hate season 1. It's easy to call it season 1 because there will be more. And we are already in the process of doing season 2, as it were. Most of the same faces, but there's going to be some new folks involved. And it's going to be every bit as good, if not better, as the story continues. And I'm really looking forward to reading everybody else's as well as writing mine.
Okay, but let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What's the series?
So one thing I wanted to add before we depart is that when Chris mentioned that everybody is sort of writing from from deep pockets of personal experience, that was actually part of the plan. When I spoke to the genesis of this is not short. I met Kevin Eichenberry at Worldcon in 2016. And, after discovering that we really hated each other, somehow we managed to mend our bridges and go forward. It was like meeting a brother from another mother. It was that sort of thing. So little did I know that only a small number of months later, I would be a special guest at HonorCon that year. And I met these two guys who had just started the Four Horsemen universe, or not just, but were certainly in the initial phases of it. And we spoke about it. And we spoke about, and there he is. There's a lot of branding going on here in this panel, and I think that that's a wonderful thing to do shamelessly. And so we were talking about marketing and models, and so I said, I got this guy you ought to meet, and that was Kevin. And we started talking not about a year later about, I approached Chris, I think first, and I said, you know, would you be interested in doing a spinoff involved kind of a mixture between Kelly's Heroes and Band of Brothers in the Kane Riordan universe? Yes. And he said, yes. I didn't get any further than that. Yeah. And so that's really what happened. And then it took a while to make sure that everybody's schedule was there, that we had brand control, quality control, making sure that everybody got a fair shake on this was very important. So we didn't rush it. And I think we were fortunate that we didn't, because we got this little thing thrown at us called COVID-19. Just for anybody who knows, the con at which this was going to launch, Fantasy, hi guys. It was canceled, I think, 5 days before we were going to be there and launch the series for real with physical copies. And it's like, well, thank you very much. But we had the planning in place, and because we had enough plans in place, we were able to roll through. Learned a lot. I learned a lot this year. I have been the student, and he has been absolutely the master when it comes to things having to do with indie publishing and electronic and all of that. And I'm smart enough to know that I'm nowhere near smart enough to step into that role. So I've been triply blessed by that, and the wonderful folks that I was able to sort of say, and to each one of the initial participants, hey, would you like to? Yes. So that made it all pretty easy. And no one has yet sent a letter bomb to me, or they were intercepted at the post office. So I guess it's been an okay experience.
And I will say, not only did we overcome COVID, we also overcame one of our authors moving to Japan, which kind of pushed Casey back just a little, and Griff stepped up and moved into the number 3 slot, which really kept it from, opening a big gap there. So kudos to Griff for doing that.
Well, Mike too.
Mike Massa, who jumped into the 1 spot. Holy God.
Oh, that's right. She was going to go first. Sorry. Yeah. So all of a sudden, Mike's like number 1. And I will tell everyone in that, when we first started doing this, Chuck sent us out a little bit of prep work. Here, read this. When we printed it out, it was about this much. So all of a sudden now Mike Massa has to read all this and, oh, by the way, produce a story and ready, go. So it was fun. It was exciting. And, because of COVID, we were sitting around anyway, so I had time to read.
Mike would have loved to have been here today, but he's actually completing his move to Southern California. Literally, the moving truck was supposed to be out here between 8:30 and 9:30 in the morning. Didn't show up until like 11. So he's moving into his old place and trying to get situated. So he didn't even have a router for his internet. So he wasn't able to make it to this.
Where in Southern California?
The home of a lot of Marines and SEALs, as far as I know, is down there in San Diego way.
I just asked because I grew up, I was born and raised in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I know. He's down in San Diego. He's even further south in Southern California.
He's that far. California. Yeah. You guys are a little too close to this because you've been spending so much time in it. So you still haven't really quite explained what is Murphy's Lawless.
Well, okay. Can I tackle it a little bit?
Go? Sure. Go for it.
Right. So I've been reading Chuck's Caineverse stuff. Actually, it's been a privilege to be an early reader for four of the 5 novels. And one of the things that struck me that was really cool about it was that Soldier Out of Time. the cold sleep, soldier that's, suddenly fire with fire, all those. And one of the things that was cool about it for me is that you have this opportunity to have these soldiers that are taken from out of their time frame and catapulted forward into strange and alien environments, which is awesome for people that are nostalgic a little bit for their era of either service or their era of science fiction fandom, where they're able to kind of make a bunch of references that they wouldn't otherwise be able to make when writing something that's set in a universe that does not have this conceit of a soldier being moved forward through time. And when Chuck decided he was going to do this, this group of soldiers, the Murphy's Lawless, is a group of soldiers that has been kidnapped and sent forward through time via cryosleep to an era far beyond their ken to serve the bad guys. And they are actually rescued by the good guy and put into service for their agenda, which is to try and save humanity and the rest of the galaxy from the bad guys. And in doing so, these aren't the good guy. These aren't the best soldiers. These are the gold bricks, the walking wounded, both physically and mentally. They're the guys that really you don't want in your highly elite team, but they're what Murphy has. And Murphy decides to make best use of them with some assistance from Ulslav and the aliens that are involved in that to try and set up a rear base to at least a base of supply and retreat for the Cain, the forces with Cain himself. Is that kind of close to it, Chuck?
Yes, very close to it. To tie it into so the fourth book is where the Lost Soldiers come from. As I was saying, so the first three books are those sort of meeting aliens. Well, the second book in that, Cain's Mutiny, and it's called Cain's Mutiny because he is not the Lost Soldiers who have been put on this planet to create a diplomatic incident. They don't know what's up. No one has told them, and they're sort of just reanimated, and there's no one there to guide them, and that's fine because they're there like they are given as much information as a Molotov cocktail is. Go in and burn it down. It's like, and they have to because they're going to need stuff to survive, and they don't have it. And the locals are already thinking that they're the bad guys because of recent events. And so war sort of happens on its own. Without getting into many of the details of that, they turn out to be a political hot potato. They're for all sorts of reasons, and they sit astride all sorts of difficult, thorny agendas. And it's very evident at the end that although Cain and company has managed to get a lot of these folks off the planet, off this alien planet, they're going to be cut aside. They're going to be calved off from the rest of the group. And there's a very, very strong sensation that they're probably going to get lost, like on the inside of a star someplace. So Cain refuses to turn them over. He turns himself over, but on the proviso that the rest of his team is able to take these folks to safety. So we have the classic renegade situation. And at the end of the fifth book, Mark of Cain, they have to get out of Dodge, all the way out of Dodge, out of human space, because there are too many agendas that are still following them around. And there's evidence that the if you will, the big bads who had managed to infiltrate Earth to some degree still have not been entirely purged from that. And they are manipulating a variety of terrestrial elements to essentially try to hunt them down and eliminate this potential embarrassment. Because the thing about the Lost Soldiers, last thing, if they ever come to light, their testimony will mean that it will become absolutely undeniable that this big bad was messing around in human affairs from roughly about 1938 all the way to the very turn of the 20th to the 21st century. And that is probably going to generate war. and that actually is not in interests on many sides. So they don't have a lot of friends. That's the setup.
Okay. How does Murphy's Lawless fit in with the rest of the series?
Hello. Okay, I'm getting a lot of I'm not hearing everybody, so I hope
All right.
everybody's mic is working.
How does the Murphy's Lawless series fit with the rest of the Caineverse?
The quick version of that is at the end of book 5. Cain has been looking. He's both doing first contact with the oldest and most enigmatic of the species. In the process of doing that, they also have the woman who is the mother of his son and had been his intended wife. At the end of that, none of that works out. And as a matter of fact, he's totally, literally lost in space, not to coin a phrase or a show title or anything like that. And with a very small team. At the same time, meanwhile, back in human space, that's when the Lost Soldiers and the remainder of Cain's crew is saying, we have to get out of Dodge. So in getting out of Dodge, they have to get out of human space. They have to get out of the space they thought they were going to run to. And so they also realize they have a lot of friends out there and they want to try to A, rendezvous, and B, save them, find where Cain and company is and effect a rendezvous. What happens along the way is that it just turns out that they've got too many. Their consumables, their supplies are going to be exhausted and they've got to leave some behind. They're also realizing that they're getting way behind what essentially is ignored enemy lines. And they're going to need some sort of way station, if possible, to either get back out or in the event that maybe there's a fifth front that could be opened up here if that was needed, a sort of advanced base, a Guam, if you will. Or an Okinawa. And that's really how they fit in. The Murphy's Lawless are the ones who are, as Griff was saying, this is the bunch that when you take a look at the Lost Soldiers and they're considering, who's going to go forward with them and who they can afford to leave behind. Everything from people who have religious problems with dealing with other species, are claustrophobic, are just having a hard time fitting in, have questionable aspects in their record or not so questionable aspects in their record. It's well known what they were up to. And that's sort of a ruthless selection matrix. And that's how Murphy's Lawless gets, roughly about 100 of them get left behind to do something pretty close to a mission impossible.
All right. What's coming next from Baen Books?
We have to find questions for more of these fine gentlemen. But what's coming next from Baen Books, in the series, what's coming next from Baen Books is probably book 6, which is a real change. The series is flipping 180 degrees about because, as I said, Cain is in completely uncharted space with a very small number of individuals. And it is, the title of that book is Endangered Species. There are 4 books that are 2 books under contract, 2 more that contract has yet to be written, but the titles will give you something of an idea of the progression in this world. They're going to have to take a very big, if the term meteoritic assault or landing means anything, that's what they have to do to get out of their stricken ship and get to a biosphere where they can survive. The first novel, and humans are not in a happy situation on this particular world at all. If you detect strong understatement, you'd be right. And the first one, like I said, is called Endangered Species. The second one is Protected Species. The third one is Killer Species. And the fourth one is Dominant Species. So if you get a sense of an arc that would be actually consistent with the kind of arcs you tend to see in Baen series, well, yeah, you'd probably be right about that. So the sixth one, Endangered Species, is the first one. And then I suspect, Eric, it may be Triage with you. We shall see. We shall see.
That will be obviously the comedy in the series.
Oh yeah.
I knew when I saw the title in the contract, Triage.
Oh yeah. Lighthearted.
Yeah.
Absolutely lighthearted.
Not only is it gonna be
atrocity.
lighthearted, but I forgot which one. It might have been you, Chris. I don't remember. Said something about by the time all these stories were put together, it's going to be a really big volume, and it's like I have collaborated on books with Chuck Gannon, and trust me, the last one we did, which is going on November, what is it? I think 235,000 words.
Yeah,
Chuck. We
235.
cut 15,000.
Yep. Oh, we cut more than that. We cut more than that. Yeah.
Did we?
Well,
Yeah.
that's a kind of a common experience then, because I remember Lost Signals, we all kind of went over like a lot.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
Sometimes you just have so much fun writing in a universe that you just don't want to stop. I know that I could have gone way over on Wave Off because I liked the character so much, and I knew where he was going and what he was doing, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I could have done another 15,000 or so in obligations pretty easy.
And
And
none of it will go to waste over time. None of it will
Yeah,
go
well, and the characters, like I really like Eichenberry's characters, and they fit into each character or each story that comes on after. They get a little bit of it. One of the things Kevin and I got to do with Mike was do a skull session. When Mike was working on the first one, we're all kind of like, hanging on his shoulder going, okay, so what are you doing here? What are you doing there? So, the biology of everything, including the alien goat, all that stuff was all, kind of stolen from one another and built upon by each successive wave. So it's been fun to be able to add to Chuck's universe, especially given that, not everybody is as competent as Cain is. And I've been able to illustrate that with Jackson and Chalmers, my two characters or main characters from is that they're, one of them's not all that competent. The other one's very competent, but saddled with the incompetent. So
I think I used every single character that Kevin came up with. If not all of them, just about. There may have been one or two minor, privates in the squad somewhere that I missed naming, but I got all of his main characters show up in Wave Off because they're fun.
I have plans for all of Griff's characters too, so it's all good.
And I'm telling you, one of the things I'm looking forward to in writing these into a braided novel that is not even it's not even going to be the six novellas presented as such. It's going to be chapters, because these guys have done and Casey have done such great work handing off to each other. And part of this was also because I was in the editing process. I think it's fair to say I was a fairly involved editor. Some might feel way too involved. But I knew we were heading towards this braided novel, and I needed to make sure that everything was going to gel. And in the course of which I would find out, I'd be making comments on somebody's novella, and I'd say, wow, and what about, and by the time I was done doing all the novellas, I kind of knew what a lot of the interstitial stuff is going to be that goes into the collected novel. And I should say something as Griff pointed out about the implied competence. Actually, in many of the ways that are most important, almost everybody is more competent than Cain, because Cain is not a soldier. I mean, here we are in a very, very heavily military series, and he's usually the guy in the room who has by far the least competence in that. And what he's gotten, he's picked up in drips and drabs along the way. But one of the things that this has allowed is when I approached Chris about this, I said, I think we've already got enough serious mystery, deep intrigue, intertwined plots in the main series. And I'm not saying we don't want any of them here, but the real focus is that it just struck me that the universe had such an opportunity, for ripping yarns when you get right down to it. A lot of people have also approached me that they would say, I want to play an RPG in this universe. And I say, I would love you to be able to. And working on it. And a lot of what I've done in terms of, if you took a look at the notes that I've kept and you said, could this be turned into a gaming supplement? Why, what an idea. I wish I'd had it. So there've been a lot of plots and plans, but this gave, I think, an opportunity to see but not only a lighter part of the series, but it really showcases characters who have some major wounds to heal that come from the past. We sort of see Cain's wounds inflicted upon him, and he still has a lot of, he has until the 5th book, a lot of agency to try to fix or compensate. These people have been thrown in the, the ass end of nowhere, and they're just trying to survive and work out their stuff. And the other thing was, I wanted people from our current perspective. I think that's one of the things that I always miss in science fiction, is that you're either so far in the future, you say, how are they using any idiom we even understand? Why are their values the same? Or it's so near future that you never escape the moment in which we exist. And one of the reasons I wanted to cite it about 100 years in the future, and then add in the Lost Soldiers further down the series, is that their idiom from the 20th century is going to start influencing the idiom that the characters, the mainline characters, are using, and you're going to get this sort of pastiche of language in the same way that 1632 you have Amadeutsch, right? American German, and what you've got here are things that that have not even shown up yet. But for instance, one of the things that I'm playing around with regarding the way the Lost Soldiers, the Lost Soldiers in general, but particularly Murphy's Lawless, discriminate themselves is what music they listened to. Are you a funker? Are you a rocker? And these sort of things, and the ones who still insist on, has bubblegum become terribly important? Cigarettes, all these sort of things.
Pizza.
Pizza.
There's the
pizza.
The pizza thread, absolutely, the pizza thread that got in there. One of the things they all miss, pizza. And then they debate on what ruins a pizza or not. And there was no real room for that in the main.
There's no real debate. There's no real debate on what ruins a pizza.
Yeah, for some of them, it's very clear what they want.
Not for some of them. For every right-thinking character, there's an absolute line that you do not cross when it comes to pizza.
Let me ask Chuck or anyone else. How many, if any, of the, I don't know what to call them, the mainline Kane Riordan books, the ones that Bain started with, how many of those should someone read before they can really make sense out of Murphy's Lawless?
Well, I'll share this one, I think, with Chris, because we spoke about this right away at the start. And the answer is none.
Okay.
You can get it right from the start.
Okay, so the story is self-contained, everybody enters, so they
Right.
That's what I figured, but I just.
There's enough of the, in the first book, there's enough of the lead in to situate yourself in the universe that you're very comfortable in it. It's nice if the readers have. Some of the readers that have read all the way through are like, oh wow, because now I see, look at, and they're starting to draw bigger threads than what the people that are just starting with Murphy's Lawless. They don't see some of the other things that are going on in the Caineverse, and how this is going to impact the story, the larger story. But that's fine. You don't need to enjoy these books. The series of books are standalone, and you'll enjoy them just as they are. Or, if you know what's going on in the Caineverse, you'll enjoy them more.
Okay, Chris, is there any particular order in which people should read the Murphy Lawless books, or is it pretty much start anywhere?
You can start anywhere, but it's better if you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Oh, you do have it.
Because
okay.
They do build on each other.
Okay.
And not all of them build equally from different parts.
And which would be the first book you should start with?
Mike Mass's Shakes. And that's the right one to start with because it sets the universe.
Okay, all right. Now I want to ask.
We cheated because we took a very common trope. I mean, it's not, one of the things is this is hardly the first series that has taken the notion of soldiers lost in time make their way in the world. So since we were able to start from that trope, I think it really orients a lot of people really quickly.
Yeah, no, it's David Drake's. God, I'm blank. I wrote a novella, and that's blanking. It's what's the name of the book? It's where the soldiers, huh?
Northworld or.
No. It's where Northworld is a retelling he did of the Icelandic sagas. No,
that's right, yeah.
Ranks of bronze. That's it. It was Roman soldiers who, at the actual battle where Roman army was destroyed by the Persians, by the Parthians, and aliens kidnapped the survivors, and they turned the Roman soldiers into their mercenaries. And when you were describing it, I was thinking that anybody who liked that book would probably like these.
And Jerry Pournelle's Janissaries, which
Yeah.
which is a
Yep.
major one. And there's also Black Battalion, Black Brigade. What is it called? I forget. Is his last name Cook?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think.
Glenn Cook.
Yep.
Yeah.
Glenn Cook.
I think it's the Black Company. Isn't it?
Black Company. That's it. Yeah.
Okay. Now let me ask. We have a bit of time left. What is Beyond Terra Publications, and who's involved?
Beyond Terra Press is one of the imprints of Chris Kennedy Publishing.
Is it Beyond Terra
and
Press? Is that the name of it?
yeah, Beyond Terra.
Okay.
And is the imprint that I have that does solely the Caineverse books.
Okay.
Murphy's Lawless. It'll also do the Lost Signals, and I don't. Are we going to talk about future things, Chuck?
We can do whatever it is that Eric would like us to do, I think. So if he's not going to stop you, I say go for it.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I mean, you got
Because just because there's one Lost Signals doesn't mean there won't be more.
Yeah.
Or other things that are very Lost Signal like. And there are some plans for a series in the Lost Signals universe, part of the Caineverse. So there's a lot more coming from Beyond Terra Press that supports the mainline novels of the Caineverse.
And we're also changing the novel structure next year. Rather than doing 6 and bundling them as one big one, we've got it set up, and it gives us a little more flexibility. It gives us a little more story agility. That we have essentially 3, and then they'll be bundled, and 3 more, and then they'll be bundled. And in the interstices of that, we have generally something else coming out at that point in time. So there will probably be, assuming there's an appetite for it, a Lost Signals, or it might be Dangerous Signals or something like that, something appropriate to whatever the theme is. We have a group page up right now for, well, it's a Caineverse group page, but I used it to get an idea of what sort of things people are really interested in. And I think that it's likely to be either first contact, intrigue, or military, more military. So we'll figure out which one of those. As a matter of fact, when the first Lost Signals comes out in reedition, we'll be looking at that in essence to say, anybody who out there who has strong feelings, let us know, because to some degree you'll shape what theme we probably jump on first. I'm actually probably going to do a novella, which is actually set in the main part of the Caineverse, where the main, I don't want to give much away, except for that in a certain way, Cain's story splits in the 5th book. That's all I'm going to say about it, but it's not over. And one of the things that people may have noticed in the course of the Caineverse is that if you think that something is a throwaway, don't heave it at the trash just yet. It may turn out to be kind of important later on, which is for me a lot of the fun.
Dun, dun.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Thank you. And so one of the things, by the way, also you were saying which of the mainstream characters show up in the have anything to do with the Murphy's Lawless? Well, 2, Richard Downing, who's essentially Cain's handler, and Trevor Corcoran, who's Nolan Corcoran's son and the sort of the badass SEAL of the 22nd century that figures prominently in the first 2 books. They are both part of this rescue mission to find Cain, and they are there along with Undul. Now you don't see Undul yet in the first novella, but when the braided novel comes through, actually you start not on Murphy's Lawless. You start on them. Fairly briefly, action setting. For those who know it, the entire encounter starts with a huge misunderstanding, and a bunch of ships are destroyed by this group that's moving, searching for Cain. And unfortunately, that could lead to other people being essentially exterminated. So we start in almost in media res, with the end of a battle, and now what do we do? And so that that will be hopefully a great bridge for folks who are already familiar with the main line of books. And for those who've been reading along and saying, you know, okay, we got fragments. We saw these characters in a little bit of fragments. Now you learn a little bit more about who they are, why they're doing what they're doing, the fact that this was not any kind of leave behind suicide mission. It has some real teeth to it. And that's so yeah. So those are some of the tie-ins.
Yeah, it's we're having a panel at this convention on you know, where is publishing going, and it's a fascinating period to be writing fiction, and I am now a publisher myself as well as an author, and I like to joke, as several of you heard me saying, that I am therefore naturally now drawn to the dark side, but it's actually interesting looking at it from that angle, as well as, you know, I've 20 some odd years as an author. And one of the things I think is happening is it's because of the changes in technology, what makes it possible is you're getting a lot more flexibility in what you can do as a writer and also as a publisher, in terms of the kind of strategies you can follow, and so in some cases, you know, you sort of form what amount to, formally or informally, a kind of, call it a tacit alliance with a major a major publisher that you know has the size and scope that they can do the stuff I don't do. For instance, I don't want to have to deal with returns because, damn it,
They don't want to either.
A bunch of books up and down from my great basement. The hell with it, you know. So I publish electronically and print on demand. That's it. I used to do some small print runs back for when, you know, Bard's Tower, and we would sell at Comic Cons, and Alexi would organize it. But for obvious reasons, we're not doing that right now. But it's really. I sometimes hear I used to hear at conventions writers complaining about how tough it is to be a writer, and that's true. It is very tough to be a writer, but I would try to find some nice way of saying, yeah, that's true. It's been true for about 3 millennia, at least, and actually things are better now than they've been. The truth is, it's better now than it's been in most times in the past. And it's easier to get published. It's easier to get published by good publishers. And I don't have the statistics, but I'm willing to bet that there are a lot more people per capita, not just in absolute numbers, because population keeps expanding, but there are more people per capita who can make a living, or at least a significant amount of income as a fiction writer, than used to be able to. I can't prove it, but I know well.
I think the opportunities are there. I mean, there are more opportunities to do that and get your books in front of people. So I would agree with you.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of opportunities, is, you know, some writers and some authors like yourselves, Eric and Chuck both, you know, you ascribe to this rising water or rising tide raises all boats. And, you know, having benefited from writing with both of you, or writing for or in your universe, Chuck, and with you, Eric, on the Mughal stuff in 1632, it's huge. And it's neat. It's neat to see these other opportunities that are kind of proliferating out there, and they're viable, as opposed to, you know, they just look like they're taking a chance, and you know, some people make it, you know, score big, and other people don't.
Well, you know, one of the things I think is happening, people have this image in their heads that the essence of being a fiction author is you basically retreat into your garret, and while you're fighting off the tuberculosis, you know, you solely and sole-handedly, with great pain, you know, write your book. And there was some
living next door to Raskolnikov, I guess. Right?
Yeah. Well,
Thank God it's not syphilis. That's what I was going to say.
When there is this much truth to that when the printing press was invented, it became possible for an author to have a mass audience. But because of the technical nature of what they did, you pretty much had to write alone. I am old enough that I can remember what it was like to collaborate writing on a manual typewriter, having to use carbon paper. And it was a royal pain in the butt. And when collaborations did happen, they tended to be between good friends who live right next, close to each other, or married couples. Whereas, I've written 10 books or 11 books, I've forgotten with Dave Freer, first when he was living in South Africa, and now he's on a small island off the coast of Tasmania because he couldn't.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that was neat about this was to, when I talked about the skull session with Kevin, and each of us, as we prepared the manuscript, before we sent it to Chuck, because that was scary, or Chris, scary as well, we were throwing it back and forth with each other, and it didn't take 5 to 7 weeks for the mail to get to them.
Right.
No, it's 5 to 7 seconds.
Yeah, that's the beauty of a shared universe too. Is that especially with people who you like and admire, and you're working together, and you're sharing your story ideas. And early on, everything was in play. Talking about Mike's skull session with Griff and I, everything was in play. And I can remember calling Chuck on a couple of occasions and telling Chuck, I really want to write horse cavalry. Well, you can't do horse cavalry, Kevin, but if you come up with a beast of burden, you can do it. And so then it was, all right, let's pivot and make this happen. And it went that way all the way through all 6 books. Everything was sent back and forth between each other. We had conversations, the Facebook Messenger chats late at night. It was really amazing to have that kind of instant communication, but also that sense of collaboration and teamwork, because we all knew this was bigger than our one 30,000 word story. It was going to be this massive, doorstop of a book at the end that maybe we'd get a chance to write season 2, who knows, but it was going to be this big project that we all had a chance to be a part of. And we needed to do justice not only to the Caineverse, but then to the characters that Chuck has created and the ones that we were allowed to create there as well. And that teamwork aspect was phenomenal all the way through.
And we all also had experience doing it. We all have some experience playing in somebody else's universe. Yours is mostly the Wandery thing, right?
Yeah, Four Horsemen. That's mine.
Yeah,
with Chris and others.
Yeah, mine was 1632.
Laura, I can't talk.
Well, the thing about the Four Horsemen universe, there's 56 books now. There are 6 core authors, of which Kevin and I are 2 of them, and we talk a lot, because we bring in other authors and let other authors that want to play in the sandbox write stories. So we're very much used to working with each other. And hey, I've got this idea. What do you think? Oh, well, hey, if you do that, I can do this. And a lot of times the collaboration improves everybody's next story.
Yeah.
Because we get ideas working with each other.
I was also very careful. One of the things that was necessary, even more important than people having anything vaguely like full conversancy in the universe, was I'm a real believer that if you build a good team, and if you think about who the people are and how they're likely to work together, everything else will kind of sort itself out. Because if part of the characteristics you're looking for are integrity, work ethic, a desire to do the best, and if they say, I want to play here, guess what? You're not only going to get success, and it's part of that, the rising tide really lifts all boats when everybody wants to crew the boat. And that's what happened. And I really feel that if this thing hadn't worked out, the human aspect of it, the camaraderie aspect of it would have been reward enough by far. And now we get to do it. I think it succeeded more than either any of us really thought it was going to. So that was, or maybe Chris was very optimistic, but I was like, I don't know. Yeah.
It's going just the way I had hoped it would. So, I mean,
yep.
All right.
I'm good.
We're going to have
you bring enough good people together, good things happen.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up because there's another session coming up that I've got to moderate. But I want to thank all of you for coming, and please, anybody who's watching this, there will be autographing sessions following this. So keep that in mind. Okay, thanks again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Thank you
Eric.
very much.
Thanks, everybody out there.
Thanks.